He was born during the winter that followed Sparta's last true victory. His father had stood at Mantinea, his grandfather at Plataea. Their shields hung above the hearth, polished and untouched, reminders of an era slipping through the fingers of time. The boy, unnamed in historical records, was raised to believe he belonged to the same lineage of glory. But Sparta had changed. The agoge was still in place, rigid, cruel, and unyielding. But fewer boys filled its ranks. Of those who did, many whispered instead of shouted. Their fathers whispered too, about lost lands, shrinking brotherhoods, and kings arguing like merchants. The helots, once shadows, had begun to walk taller. The perioikoi, once silent, now counted coins more than honor. Still, the boy believed. He ran barefoot across the Eurotas. He bled in silence when struck. He stole food and took beatings when caught, accepting pain as a lesson. He learned to kill with his hands, to obey with his eyes, to die in theory long before facing a blade. But something gnawed at him, not rebellion, but confusion. His grandfather spoke little, except to praise the old ways. His father spoke even less. At night, the boy would stare at the shields and wonder what was left to fight for. Glory? Sparta had none left to win. Land? There was none left to take. Brotherhood? His peers competed more for food than honor. And love? Sparta did not teach love. It taught endurance. At 15, he was chosen for the Cryptaea. Pride should have filled him, but instead, he felt hollow. He wandered the hills with a dagger, shadowing helot farms, measuring strength in silhouettes, judging fear by posture. He killed one, perhaps two. He told no one. The silence weighed more heavily than the blade. At 20, he received his full shield, accepted into the ranks of Spartiates. The ceremony was sparse, no cheering crowds, no sacred chants. Just names called, backs straightened, and a nod from the ephor. He trained, he fought, he bled. But the enemies were fewer, the battles shorter, and the victories meaningless. Most of his time was spent watching borders, watching helots, watching the horizon for invaders who no longer came. His friends fell not in war, but to boredom. Some drank, others vanished into the hills. A few whispered about leaving, joining mercenary bands in Egypt, fighting for gold instead of honor. He stayed not out of loyalty, but inertia. One autumn, news came that a distant cousin had died in a skirmish with Aetolians. The family gathered in ritual, but no tears were shed. Spartans did not weep. They nodded. They remembered. They moved on. But he didn't. He returned home that night, stared at the old shields, and for the first time, he asked the question aloud. What was it all for? No one answered. Years passed, but Sparta did not change. Or rather, it did, but only in ways it refused to admit. The temple still stood, but the priests spoke to emptier crowds. The agoge still operated, but fewer sons entered, and even fewer emerged whole. The ephors still ruled, but their words were drowned by the weight of irrelevance. Our warrior, now no longer a boy, grew older, though not in the way Athenians did. He had no journal of thoughts, no sculpted busts, no epics written in his name. He had scars. He had silence. He had routine. He married late, chosen by lot. His wife was strong, as Spartan law desired, and she bore him 2 sons. He did not love her, for Sparta did not teach men to love. He respected her because she was fierce, because she spoke plainly, because she reminded him of who they once were. His sons entered the Agoge. He watched them bleed, watched them shiver through nights of punishment, watched them grit their teeth when beaten by peers. He felt something then. Pride, perhaps, or guilt, or both. He did not speak of it. The elder son did not survive the training. An illness, perhaps, or neglect. No one explained. No one comforted. The body was buried without ceremony. His wife did not cry. Neither did he. Instead, they sat in silence, backs straight, hands empty. The younger son endured. But the world was smaller now. The Thebans had fortified the north. The Messenians no longer paid tribute. Corinth spoke openly against the League. Even Athens, humbled and fractured, had begun to stir again. And Sparta? It held meetings. It sent envoys. It did nothing. One evening, as the sun set red over the Taygetus mountains, he walked alone beyond the city's edge. There, among stones and dry grass, he encountered a group of boys training. Not Spartans, but mercenaries, in training from abroad. Sons of foreigners, taught to fight in the Laconian way. They mimicked the phalanx. They shouted commands in broken Dorian. They wore imitations of Spartan cloaks, dyed too brightly. He watched. They noticed him, and for a moment, froze, half in awe, half in uncertainty. One of them stepped forward and asked, "Are you one of them?" He nodded, but only once. They asked for advice. He gave none. They asked if the stories were true about Thermopylae, about boys raised by wolves, about mothers who laughed when their sons died. He said nothing. Then he turned and walked back to a city he no longer recognized, to a silence deeper than words, to a legacy that no longer fit its frame. That night, he sat with his wife and asked, "Do you think we were ever what they say we were?" She stared for a long moment, then replied, "No, but we believed we were. And sometimes, that was enough." He didn't answer, but he stayed. Because what else could he do? Time moved forward, but Sparta stood still, like a statue refusing to crumble, even as moss crept over its feet. The city no longer sent out armies. It sent memories. Delegations arrived not to negotiate with power, but to walk among ruins and whisper about what had once been. The warrior, now gray at the temples, slower in the joints, found himself the subject of foreign curiosity. Scholars from Alexandria, senators from Rome, and wandering poets would occasionally stop him on the street, asking questions with eyes wide in reverence. Did you train in the Agoge? Did you serve in the phalanx? Did you eat the black broth? He answered simply, yes, yes, yes. They wrote it all down, as if his life were proof of something eternal. But they didn't see the empty training yards, the crumbling gymnasia, the children who no longer trained in silence, but played like those in any other city. He once visited the temple of Athena Chalkioikos, where he had been blessed before his first battle. Now, ivy climbed its columns. Pigeons nested in the crevices. The priest was gone. No incense, no chants. In the marketplace, foreign goods now appeared. Wines from Sicily, silks from the East, bronze trinkets shaped like helmets Sparta had not worn in generations. The vendors sold Spartan steel to eager travelers, decorative blades, dull and thin. His hand brushed one. It bent at the hilt. He said nothing. The ephors still met weekly, but now their edicts addressed taxes and trade permits. The kings, once godlike in stature, now argued over ceremonial duties. One had even appeared drunk at a festival. No one punished him. No one spoke of it. The warrior no longer dreamed of battle. His mind wandered to the Eurotas River, where he had once raced barefoot. He returned there often, sitting beside it for hours. He watched boys fish with nets, their laughter echoing across the water. None of them trained. None wore red cloaks. One day, his son, now grown, sat beside him, their feet in the water. They spoke little. Then the son asked, "Would you change it if you could?" The warrior replied, "Change what? All of it. The way you were raised, the things you saw, the things you made me do." The older man was quiet for a long time. Then, "It made us strong." "But strong for what?" the son asked. He had no answer. That night, the warrior stood in front of his home and looked up at the stars. In his youth, they had spoken of constellations as omens, signs from the gods. Now, they were just stars. And Sparta? It was just a place where people once believed in something bigger than themselves and lost everything to preserve it. He died one winter morning without ceremony. There was no war cry, no phalanx to carry him, no poets to immortalize him in verse. Just a quiet breath, a closed eye, and the slow creak of a wooden chair as his body slumped forward under the weight of time. His wife prepared the body. His son built the pyre. The neighbors watched in respectful silence, but no crowd gathered. No herald announced his name. No statues were raised. In another era, his death would have been honored with rites echoing back to Lycurgus himself. But now, only embers and wind. And yet, as the flames rose, a few boys from the village gathered nearby. They had heard stories, not official ones, not recited in schools, but whispered ones, that he had fought in border raids, that he had once killed a helot in silence, that he had walked into the mountains alone and returned with eyes that saw too much. They didn't understand it all, but they watched anyway, the way boys do when sensing something sacred, even if unnamed. His son stood beside the fire. He wore no armor, no red cloak, just a linen tunic, sun, bleached and frayed. And as the smoke rose, he whispered the words his father had once said, "Beneath the olive tree, we were strong. But strong for what?" And in that question, not the silence, not the fire, Sparta lived on. Because Sparta, by then, had ceased to be a city. It had become a memory, a parable. A lesson in extremes. And perhaps that was always its destiny, not to endure in power, but in warning. To show the world what happens when a people shape themselves into iron and forget that iron rusts, when discipline becomes dogma, when courage becomes cruelty, when unity demands silence, and when greatness is pursued so single-mindedly that everything else is left behind, even love, even joy, even the future. In the end, all that remains are stories. Some whispered, some carved in stone, some buried beneath layers of legend. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the footsteps in the dust, still feel the silence between the walls, still see the shields hanging in empty homes. And in that silence, Sparta speaks. The centuries moved on without waiting. New empires rose. Rome swallowed Greece. Byzantium preserved its ashes. Crusaders trampled ancient roads. The Ottomans built new towers over old bones. Sparta was renamed, restructured, forgotten, and remembered again and again. But beneath every ruin, the old stones still whispered. Historians came, chiseling through myths. Some found truth, the harsh laws, the enslaved helots, the tyranny dressed as order. Others searched for ideals, simplicity, courage, unity. Most found a contradiction, a society both feared and admired, brutal and disciplined, elevated and blind. And tourists came. They stood on the crumbling foundations of temples. They pointed to stones where kings once walked. They took photos beside reconstructions, bought Spartan helmets, forged in modern factories. Children ran where warriors once trained. Souvenirs echoed in the air where war chants once rang. No Spartan would have recognized it. And yet, perhaps that was always the end. No society can remain frozen forever. To endure, it must bend, breathe, change. Sparta refused. It clung to its myth, even as the world moved around it. But myths, too, evolve. In every generation, someone revives the Spartan image, a soldier facing impossible odds, an athlete embracing pain, a leader choosing sacrifice. The story returns, adapted, twisted, modernized, stripped of helots, cleansed of fear, polished for consumption. Leonidas becomes a slogan. The agoge becomes a training program. Discipline becomes a brand. And still, the heart of the myth beats, stubborn, proud, defiant. Because deep down, we all carry some version of Sparta, in our hunger for control, in our fear of weakness, in our admiration of order, in our longing for purpose. Sparta was never meant to last, but it was meant to be remembered, not for its victories, but for what it dared to become. A society that wagered everything on the human will and lost. Not in one battle, not in one year, but across centuries of silence. And yet, as long as someone asks, "What would you sacrifice for strength?" Sparta answers,